Hello, I'm Dave Fisher. What I thought I'd do is I thought I'd make a little recap of meetings. To be honest, the recap of this meeting, it was just an intro meeting, so I don't know how useful this one is. But I wanted to get in the habit of doing it, right? So the goal being we have a small group. We're going through the story 1 week at a time. And each week we're going to take one chapter. And so our first meeting was today, so I'm filming this video on September the 9th. So we did the group distribution and went through a couple presentations just a few minutes ago. I just finished it there. We had, 13, 14 people. It was pretty awesome. And I wanted to allow people to join late in this group if they wanted to. And I was hoping to make a video archive. So this is hopefully the first of what will be many video recaps of small group meetings that we've had. And this is the one from September the 9th for the introduction. So what do we do in the meeting? So the first thing we did is we introduced each other to one another, got to kind of know who was in the room. So I'll introduce me. So I'm Dave Fisher, professor in the computer science area. I've been a teacher at Rose for, I think this is like year 18. I was a student at Rose before that. So from 96 to now, I've had Rose-Hulman as a big part of my life. My goal as a student was to come back and be a professor here. 4 kids, ages 12, 10, 8, 6. Really love spending time with them. So a big part of who I am is a dad. I go to church at Maryland. It's just up the road a little bit here. And Maryland started this series of going through the story, which was the motivation for starting this small group as well. So we're going to be going through this book, The Story, which is an abridged Bible. And so I wanted to tell you some more about that. So that's kind of the story overview here. And tell you a little bit more about my life and why I believe and things like that. So that was what we did first in the group. And then everybody else introduced themselves. We went around the horn and introduced people. We had probably like 4 or 5 faculty members and then probably like 7 students. It was pretty great. I've got everybody's name written down here. Hopefully I can follow up with everybody. And then after that, I foolishly dominated the conversation a little too much and did 2 presentations. So things that helped me and then also an overview of the story. In future weeks, I do not plan to talk so much. I really want it to be a discussion, but today I kind of presented quite a bit. So I thought I'd show you what I presented. So the first presentation that I kind of showed was I called Big Questions. This is part of a video series that I was making called Life Is. I'll make that full series available to you at some point. I haven't quite got it all together. But this is kind of like the 3 big questions that help whenever I'm kind of like struggling with my faith is the best way to say it. And how often do I struggle with my faith? It's more like I lose confidence to confidently talk to other people. And so kind of like, I don't know, it's my daily routine that helps get my brain back to where I'm the most comfortable is to go through this Big Questions series. So what are these questions that I ask myself? Well, the first one that I ask is, are we random or were we created? I find this question pretty easy, which is why I start here, because it helps root my confidence. I never really believed that we were random. It just never really made sense to me. Open my eyes and I look around, I see the things that we're able to build, the things we're able to think, the things we're able to do, the ways we're able to interact. I'm confident that we were created, right? So know enough about science and entropy that I don't think the random thing makes sense. And I can tell a story about it, but I'll try to keep it concise. So you could come out as random, you could come out as created, you could also come out as undecided. Albert Einstein had a quote that was fun. He said, there are only 2 ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is though everything is a miracle. And I fall into the everything is a miracle because it was created camp. Interestingly, Albert Einstein was not a Christian. He fell into the nothing is a miracle camp, but he still had the quote that I like to put up here. Because I do only have 3 questions, I'm going to modify the first question a little bit just because I don't want to use up a question for something so easy. And I'm going to add 3 words. I'm going to add for a reason. And so what this does, how does this change the question? So we're not random, in my opinion. I believe that we were created. And so we could be created for no reason, like just for the whim of the creator. But I'll say that I told this story once whenever I was walking down the hall with Bowen. He's one of my sons. And there were a bunch of doors in the hallway. And I said, hey, Bowen, these doors, they were created, right? I can see them. They were created by somebody who's probably rational, right? So like, smart, intelligent. Do you think they do anything? Do you think they open into rooms, or do you think they're just doors, right? That open to nothing, right? Just a wall. He's like, they open into doors, right? And so these doors were created for a reason. And I think that we were created intentionally for a purpose. And so this question doesn't answer much, but it motivates, right? So if we're created intentionally for a purpose, we need to be investing time into figuring out what that purpose is. So question number 2 that helps me. There's a lot of different directions that people go from here, obviously. There's a lot of different religions that people investigate. There's a lot of different theories that people look at. No surprise, since I'm leading this group, my question that I found useful to me is, who was Jesus? And so you gotta decide who was Jesus. Jesus asked this directly of people, by the way. So like this quote is from Matthew to Matthew, I think. What about you? He may have been talking to all the apostles. Who do you say I am? And Matthew answered, God's Messiah, right? And so he was ready to answer that question. There are a couple ways out of this bubble. Some people choose to come out of this diamond saying that he didn't exist, right? So there was no Jesus. It's all conspiracy, right? All lies. Some surveys show it's as high as 20% in some areas, right? Which is crazy. Historians don't actually feel that way either. They think there's enough historical evidence that he was a person. Historians, regularly say he was just a person, but that we won't go there. But I did want to acknowledge that a lot of people say he didn't exist, and I think their motivation is largely that they don't want to think about it, right? It's like they just don't want to consider it, and so they prefer to just say it didn't exist, all lies, right? As soon as you accept that Jesus did exist, and as soon as you kind of look at some of the things he said, a lot of people next, they want to say that he was a good teacher, showed a message of love that's valuable for all the people, but they don't want to go, very much like Gandhi, they don't want to go any farther than that. I'll say that if you look at his statements, so this is, Jesus said, I and the Father are one, right? So he's claiming to be God, right? And he says, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. And when he says I am, he's referring to what God said to Moses. And so I am who I am, right? Tell the people that I am has sent you, right? And so I am is Yahweh, is God. So I am God. So the reason I point out these two things is that you can't really say he was a good teacher if these are his teachings, right? So you could say he was a lunatic, right? Like that's one way out. You could say that he was a liar. He knew the scriptures. He was Jewish. He knew what to say, and he just was lying, right? The other way you could come out of these is you could, of course, say that he was the Lord. And then a lot of people are also undecided. So what about me? I choose Lord, right? So why do I choose Lord? When did I choose Lord? How did I choose Lord? So I chose Lord based on experiences from my life, right? So I feel like I have prayed at times, and I have received answer to prayer, and that is something that gives me confidence in the Lord. I've looked at the life of Jesus in the Bible. I've looked at what he said. I've looked at what he's done, and they add up, right? So they make sense to me. And it happened when I was younger, whenever I decided he was the Lord, so I don't remember the details as well. And I've gone up and down in faith over time, but I am confident that God raised him from the dead after 3 days. He was the Lord. He was the person we're talking about with question number 1, right? There was a creator, and Jesus was the creator. I and the Father are one. So that's my big question number 2. If you also choose to come out of this diamond as Lord, it's important to look at what Jesus said. One of the quotes that I enjoy, it was from Luke 10:27. Somebody walked up to Jesus and they just said, what must I do to inherit eternal life, right? And in this version, he actually responds to man, what's written in the law? What do you say? In other versions, Jesus answered. So I'm sure he had this conversation a lot. And the Pharisee answered, our teacher of the law answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And To that, Jesus responded, do this and you will live. And I think that this verse is really instructive and really useful. And I think that it breaks it down here into the 4 pieces of how you're supposed to love God. And that's meaningful, right? So mind is your ability to figure things out. Like you're expected to figure out what's right. You're expected to figure out the will of God for your life. Your strength is your ability to do it, right? So you're supposed to decide what's right, and then you're supposed to do it. So strength includes things like serving, right? So if you figured out that serving is good, you should go do it. Going to church, getting to know God, spending time with the Bible. Your strength is actually doing these things. Heart is that you should get to the point where this is exactly what you want to do. You get drunk as many times as you want. You just don't want to, right? You do drugs as many times as you want. You just don't want to. You go to church exactly as many times as you want, which is, maybe every Sunday, right? So, but it's getting yourself to where you want the same things that God wants for your life. Soul is the God-breathed part of you. This is the acceptance that you're not your own. You're part of a bigger picture. You're important because God's important, and you're a part of God, right? The best way to show your soul that you love the Lord your God with all your soul, I think, is shown in humility, right? So you're not saved through works. You're saved through grace, and so when you accept that and you live your life with that motivation in your actions, that's how you love the Lord your God with all your soul. And then the last is love your neighbor as yourself. We're put on this earth and we interact. And if you love your neighbor, then you'll do this and you'll live. So just a verse I really like. Another verse I really like, Romans 12:2. Won't spend as much time on this one, but don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. With my kids, I rephrase it, ask questions to figure out the will of God, right? The real version says, by testing, you may be able to discern what the will of God is. And their version is better because testing, it implies that you're asking questions, you're running experiments, maybe it's a thought experiment, and you're figuring out what's what. So you're discerning the will of God, which is good, acceptable, and perfect. And then I add, for you, with my kids. But that's a verse that I like, is that you're supposed to be using your mind to figure stuff out. You're supposed to be engaging your mind to learn more about God. Learning more about the Lord, I've still got a third question coming. So I believe we're created for a reason. I believe Jesus was the Lord. And then the last question is, will you choose God's will for your life? And so no surprise, you can come out of this bubble choosing your own will, or you can choose God's will, or maybe you're still kind of thinking about it. This question, if you'd asked me when I was like 15, like, do I choose God's will? I said, yeah, of course I choose God's will. And when I was 25, you'd ask me, I probably would have said the same thing. And you asked me when I'm 40, it's like, hey, did you choose God's will when you were like 25? And the answer is, I clearly didn't, right? I had a lot of Dave's will in my actions. And it's honestly only been in the last year or so that I've really made an all-in covenant to try to surrender my life to God. So that is my, I don't want to call it like daily routine or daily system. Whenever I'm losing confidence in my faith, this is kind of what I roll back to. It's like, so we're created for a purpose. Jesus was the Lord. The things that are in the Bible are true. If I look at what he said, I need to choose God's will for my life, and I'm all in and I'm ready to go. Right. So that's kind of what I think about to try to go through my routine and motivate myself for the behaviors of the day. I also really like this book. This is Rick Warren's book, Purpose Driven Life. Really good book if you have interest in it. There's a quote in there that I like. So surrendering your life to God's will is not a foolish emotional impulse, but a rational, intelligent act. The most reasonable and responsible and sensible choice you can make for your life. I modified it a little bit there, but if you knew me well and you read that book, you would see that quote and you'd be like, oh, that's the one that Dave's going to really resonate with him. So I just thought I'd put that quote up here. So I started the meeting with that little presentation because it's been useful to me, right? And so I wanted to share that. It's also a way to know more about me. is kind of the idea. The next thing I did in the small group is I did another presentation. Didn't get people engaged nearly as much as I should have. But I wanted to tell people about the story, just so you know what is this book that we're getting into. So the thing most people know is that there's 31 chapters. We're going to do one chapter a week. You do the math, that works out to where we need breaks as well. So like between fall and winter break, you're going to still do a chapter a week. And it goes all the way into spring, right? So if we stick with it, we will finish the story in spring. Each chapter is a reasonable length, by the way. It's only like 12 pages for this first one. But I kind of wanted to talk about what is the story, what is this book, who's it for, what's kind of the idea. And so it's just kind of my version of what is this book, the story. I forgot. Started with a couple goals. So one of my goals for this small group and for these like video recaps is to help people stay part of the vine, is how I like to say it. So when I was in college for 9 years, undergrad and grad. I wasn't part of the vine. I was a good person, right? Like I made good choices. I tried to love other people, but I didn't go to church. I didn't read the Bible. I barely ever prayed. That's not part of the vine, right? And so because of my life and things that poor choices I've made in my life, I wanted to try to make more opportunities for college age people to stay part of the vine. This comes from John 15:5-6. I'm the vine, you're the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If he doesn't remain in me, so this is kind of like, I included this part because I think this describes the middle portions of my life. If anyone doesn't remain in me, he's like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burnt. So didn't want to be thrown into the fire and burnt. And so wanted to stay part of the vine. So that's one of my motivations for being a part of this group. I also think that the series is going to help with our being rooted, right? So digging deeper, so when the time of testing comes, we won't fall away. And you can read this. I won't read this parable. It's a pretty popular parable. You probably know it already. But the idea is that I really like the New Testament. Like I really like reading about Jesus. His words resonate with me. His actions make sense to me. I love Jesus, right? I love the New Testament. I read it who knows how many times, memorized parts of it. New Testament, New Testament, New Testament. I barely know the Old Testament, right? So I've listened to it on audiobook. You know how much you retain when you listen to something. And I think it would be really wise for me to have better roots. So the first 3/4 of the Bible is the Old Testament. So one of the goals of this group is to put a little bit of focus on the Old Testament, get to know God's story. So the title of the book is very inspiring. So comparing the Bible and the story, just kind of like how do they relate? So they are the same information. The version of the Bible that I like is the NIV Bible, New International Version. There's many versions, of course. New International Version was made by Zondervan. Zondervan also makes the story. And the story is an abridged Bible. So it's selections from the Bible. Total, the Bible is about 1,200 pages, depending on how it's printed. The story is more like 450. So it's like, 40% the number of pages. Also, the font in this thing is huge. I don't know if you've looked at it, but it's like jumbo font. So it's like maybe 1/4 the number of words as the Bible. But it's created by a group that tries to pick the most meaningful parts of the Bible and present them to you. It's also kind of meant to be, pastors describe it this way. It's like, if it's your first time reading the Bible, the story is great, right? Because it leaves out, like, I don't know, some of the less instructive parts, I guess I'd say. And it focuses more on things that can be easily understood and hopefully applied to your life. And so I think it's a really great way that meets how people learn. And so the story is really written for people who either haven't read the Bible before or haven't really understood it, or people like me that like I've listened to the audiobook, but I didn't retain anything at all, to where I could say I'm reading it for the first time, especially the Old Testament, of course. And so it's for me, right? It's one of the people it's for. If you look at the Old Testament is the time before the birth of Christ. And then the New Testament is just the short interval after he was born. So his life is in the Gospels, and then the letters that were written around to the church. Digging a little deeper, the Old Testament. So first off, the Old Testament in Christianity is the exact same as the Jewish Bible. They're one and the same, right? So the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, it's all the same scrolls, right? And it wasn't until Jesus came that we split, right? So it's kind of the way to say it. The Jewish Bible is also called the Tanakh. Tanakh is just an acronym, kind of like the word scuba. So scuba actually means self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. The Tanakh actually is short for the Torah, and then I can't pronounce these other words, this section and this section. So it's the three sections of the book form up the Tanakh. The Tanakh starts with the Torah. These are the writings of Moses, so Genesis through Deuteronomy. These are the exact same as the first 5 books in the Bible, the Old Testament. They're the same information. We call it the Pentateuch. I don't really know how to say that, but if I say it fast, maybe you'll believe me. Exactly the same, right? After that come the prophets and the Tanakh. And then you'll start to notice that some orders change, right? So like we have Ruth right here, which is kind of where she chronologically fell. But the Tanakh has the ordering with Ruth down here. And the Tanakh is the more historical ordering. So this is like the ordering in which like the scrolls would be read. And Jesus, whenever he like talks about things in the beginning, he talks about like the blood of Abel, which is like the beginning of Genesis. And then he talks about like, was it Zerubbabel killed on the way to the altar, which is the last thing that happened in Chronicles, right? And so like whenever he talks about the beginning and the end of the Bible that Jesus had, he talks about this ordering. But of course we put Chronicles chronologically where it would be. And so there's a little bit of reordering there, but it really is the same information. The other thing I'll mention about the Old Testament, just because it's interesting, Catholics have more books than Protestants. Orthodox have slightly more books than that even. And so over here, things with yellow errors are part of the Catholic canon, right? So they include these other books as well in the Old Testament. These books were writings from the Second Temple, so kind of like 400 BC to like 100 AD. These writings Jesus had access to. He read these as well. The reason that they're not included in the Protestant Bible is largely how people referred to them, right? So when people read the Tanakh, they would say, and here is the voice of the Lord, right? Like, here's the voice of God speaking to you. And then whenever they read these second writing books, which were not part of the Tanakh, they would say, like, here's a really good teaching, right? And so Protestants decided not to include them. Catholics decided to include them. Long histories of these things, but I just thought I'd share that just because it was interesting about the history of the Bible. The New Testament, this is the Bible again, starts with the story of Jesus in the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is the story of Jesus. Same story 4 times, different levels of details, different inclusions, things like that. Definitely should spend a lot of your time reading those, and you don't need a summary of those. Like, you can just read those, right? Acts is the early church, like after Jesus and things the early church did. And then come the epistles, the letters, usually written by Paul, but other authors as well. And then books written by their authors. I think all of these, and then that one's by John. So 27 books in the New Testament, 39 in the Old Testament. So it kind of looks like it's similar numbers of books, but actually if you look at the number of pages, some of these Old Testament books are big, right? Like Psalms is a big one, right? It's this block down here. It's about 3/4 of the Bible. And so for me, I love the New Testament, read it many times, kind of ignored the first 3/4 of the Bible for quite a while. And the story is a chance to fix that, right? So we're gonna dig in to the Old Testament. The story also has the New Testament. What I'm most intrigued by is that I would like to get to know the Old Testament like as well as I know the New Testament. So that's one of my goals, personal goals. Where'd the Bible come from? I won't play this video, of course. This is Tim Mackey. He's one of the founders of the Bible Project. you should spend some time on the Bible Project, kind of learn about their perspectives on the Bible. He studied it thoroughly, and one of the messages that he tries to make clear is it's not golden tablets dropped from the sky. So I grew up in a church that kind of felt that way, like pinned by God, and he kind of wants to make the point that's like this is a human book that speaks God's word to humans, right? So it's a historical document, right? So it's an ancient book that people are choosing to lead their lives by, and there's a few things in it that are hard to make sense of, and especially the Old Testament, right? But the Lord commanded Moses to write it and make sure that it was remembered, and then he did. It tells the history of God's involvement with his people, his plan to redeem people. It's the story about the covenants that he's made to live differently and be shaped by this thing. And oops, don't want this to play. It's 45 minutes long. You should go watch it. Where did the Bible come from? Why? It's good to watch, right? I will also point out that whenever I put up a quote like "not golden tablets dropped from the sky," I like to balance that out a little bit with all Scripture is God breathed, right? So this is in 2 Timothy. It's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, right? So a servant of God may be equipped for every good work. So it's important to realize the significance of the Bible, but also to understand what it is as you read it and get to know it better. I'll also say that this sentence causes some criticisms of the story, of course, because if it's 1/4 of the Bible, roughly, like what happened to the other parts, right? So, you think about it. Somebody sat in a room and they decided to, yes, include that. No, don't include that. Yes, include that. And, how do they pick it? And like this verse says that it's all useful, right? And I would say that they picked it. It was done by good, smart people. They picked it on verses that are most instructive, verses that help tell the story of God the best. And I think that it's really based on how people learn effectively. So it's easy to get confused in some parts and stop reading, right? That doesn't happen in the story, right? It reads nicely. It's a narrative form. You avoid the bog downs, right? I will say that a lot of people consider it to be, it's for people that are reading the Bible for the first time, which is me, meaning that it shouldn't be the only experience you have with the Bible, but it's the way that you should probably start diving in. So if you just dive into reading the Old Testament, I've done it too, right? So most people, they stop. Maybe in Leviticus is where a lot of people stop, right? It goes good for a while, but then it's hard. The goal here is to be successful. If you need some more motivation, Jesus knew the Bible inside and out. That was the scrolls or the teachings or the readings, our Old Testament. And if Jesus spent all this time knowing the Bible to where he basically, it seemed like he had it memorized, right? And your goal is to be Christ-like. Shouldn't, knowing the Bible be a big part of your life? So that's kind of extra motivation, number one. And so our goal is to have people in this group that succeed, right? So that they read all of the story and they use that as a jumping off point for other things in their life. Other motivations. So my sister's name is Carmen. It really is. I've known Carmen for 40 years. She lives in Oregon right now. I know her well and I love her is the easiest way to say it. Who loves Carmen more, you or me, right? And so it's a silly question, obviously. I love Carmen more. And why do I love Carmen more? It's like, well, you don't even know Carmen. I just told you her name, right? And so I can love her a lot more because I actually know her, right? And so that says, how do you get to know God, right? So you get to know God by thinking about, Christ-like perspective, talking with other people, coming to groups like this. And you're as close to God as you choose to be. And so how well you know him affects how well you love him, right? So that's motivation number 2. That motivation is enough for me, right? Extra motivation number 3, they start with the most important, get less important as I go down. You should always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have. And so thinking about things is important, and knowing the Bible is important. And when you do it with gentleness and respect. So The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, right? Go out into the harvest field and take this inside your brain with you, right? So that's kind of the idea. So the story is also rearranged to be perfectly chronological. So everything is in chronological order, which I like. Makes it really easy to kind of like get these stories to like all make sense in your head. I've got a poster. It's on the other side of the room. It's like all the people and the genealogies. And it's nice that you can kind of get it all in one chunk. And it helps you really keep track of things. Because I know for me, like I heard stories, but they were all kind of like scatterbrained and splotched and no longer, right? They're in order in my head now, right? And so that narrative form, that chronological arrangement really helps a lot. The order follows the exact same order of the Bible. It kind of follows these 5 major movements. Movements are just kind of like themes that people have seen in sections of the Bible. So things start with creation, Genesis 1 through 11, the flood. That's kind of where we start. After that, the next movement is the story of Israel, so God's chosen people. After Israel comes the story of Jesus, the redemption and Jesus' life and death. After Jesus is the church, so it doesn't end with Jesus. There's information here about the teachings of Paul, the travels of Paul, Luke, the story of the church after Jesus was no longer on the earth. And then it finishes with Revelations, so the new garden, the restoration. And so that's kind of the 5 movements that a lot of people identify in the Bible. And you could say 4, 6, or 10, or whatever you want, but this is one way to show the movements. The next thing I'll say is which of these is the biggest, right? So just think about for a minute which of these sections are like the biggest. The answer is that it is the Israel section, right? So the Old Testament has a lot of information in it, right? It's 3/4 of the Bible. So the story has chapter 1 is creation, the beginning of life as we know it. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Seth, Noah, like a lot of stories that you might know. It's based on just Genesis 1 through 11. You could easily read the actual Bible as opposed to the story. Go ahead and read the story because I like it. But then after that, we start with the second movement, which was Israel, which is 20 chapters, right? So it takes a while. We're going to do 1 chapter per week, so it's 20 weeks. We're talking about like 4.5 months. Like, I mean, Jesus is going to be born in like February with the schedule that we're following, right? And so we're going to dive into the Old Testament and really get to know the stories in it. And I'm starting to get to the point where I can do better with the knowledge. So I've listened to it on audiobooks a couple of times. My knowledge is getting better, which is good. But I'm still not very good at like understanding it or what do I learn about God from the story, the nature of God? What do I learn about the schemes of the devil? How can I apply this to my life? I'm still working on a lot of that. So knowledge I'm starting to get good with, but the other steps I'm struggling with, which is my motivation for being a part of a small group. There's people that I'm planning on learning from. So no pressure, but I'm planning on learning from you. After the story of Israel will come the story of Jesus, which I'm much more familiar with. Jesus is six books and 6 chapters in the story. After Jesus comes the church, and so Paul's mission and learning more about Paul. And then the book of Revelations gets the final chapter. So you can see that there's 5 movements, but it's going to be a lot of Israel, right? So just kind of know what you're getting into, right? So when you sign up for this thing. Part of each week, what I want to do is I want to try to get a timeline of when these things happen, characters that were involved in the story, and locations where these things happen. So every week you're going to kind of see timeline, characters, locations. It's going to be kind of like the start of the intro of every week. And the story lists dates in it. So if you flip it up to one of the early pages, you'll see that there's timelines in there. And what they choose to do is they choose to give like exact years. Like Abram was born in 2166 BC. Like that was the year, right? I do want to point out that there is, even among Christian scholars, bigger standard deviations of the date. So, for example, these are 2 proposed dates for Exodus. So, Exodus, some people believe in a much later Exodus, 1250 BC. Some people look at the exact same information and say the Exodus from Egypt was around 1440 BC. And so, like, that's 200 years, right? So, like, a lot of these things are like plus or minus 200 years. And the farther you go back, the bigger the swing. So like, the story says he was born in 2166. That just depends on your interpretation. So I don't mind that at all, that they list a year. It's their very best guess from very smart people. But do know that there is actually a lot more uncertainty than actual, like it was this year. So I just thought I'd point that out in the timeline. And I will regularly show their timeline, which will show an exact year. But know that there is a lot of debate about these things. So the story starts with creation. Hard to put a good date on that one. And then, of course, goes into when Abram was born. Abram renamed Abraham. And so really things are like 2000 BC is what we're talking about here. Joseph and when that happened. And then, of course, deliverance. So getting out of Egypt, the exile, the Exodus. You can see that they're using the 1446. So they're using the 1440 version in their numbers. It'll go through Moses receiving the commandments, wandering in the desert, Joshua conquering the promised land, the time of Judges, Ruth. If you know what I'm talking about, great. If you don't have any idea, that's fine. The kings, Saul, David, Solomon, the divided kingdom, the prophets. I'll say that the prophets in general get a little bit less attention in the story than they do in the Bible, just because it is meant to be like a narrative of stories, and it's hard to include all of the teachings of the prophets in the story, right? And then the end of the kingdoms and their fall, and then their exile into Babylon, Daniel in the lion's den. They're coming back to the promised land. The story of Esther building the second temple, and then that's kind of where the Old Testament ends. Notice that we're talking about like 400 BC here with Malachi is where the Old Testament ends. 400 years pass, which is kind of interesting. During that time frame, that's where a lot of those Middle Temple writings come in that were not part of the Tanakh. And then the birth of Jesus, and then, of course, we get into Jesus' ministry, which is very few years, so 3 years in here, which they've put dates on everything, right? And obviously there's debate and contention about what years things happen, but Jesus buried and resurrected in 30 AD, his ascension, then Paul's mention and Paul's mission, and then Revelations is the chapter 31. So that's kind of the outline of the story and the different chapters that we're going to learn about. Then, of course, each week we'll have characters that are in it. That doesn't make sense for this week at all because it just kind of, I'm giving an overview, right? But each week we'll say like who the characters are for that week. We'll also try to show the locations as best we can. There's a book that I really like. It's called the Holman Bible Atlas. I think it's in the slides here in a minute. But it has some really good maps, and I really enjoy maps. And I will say that much like the dates, like these are their best guess based on archaeological evidence, right? It's not necessarily perfect, but to be honest, like, does it affect my life if the dot was actually off by a few kilometers, right? Or more? It doesn't, right? And so the Bible, the story, it takes place, as far west as Egypt, and then, of course, as far east as Babylon. So where's Baghdad at? So, Baghdad right there. Babylon was just below it. And so this is kind of the range where the stories take place. These are the modern countries of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and then, of course, Israel. And then you can decide for yourself who like the Gaza Strip and the West Bank belong to. But that's the region that we're talking about here. By the way, this is a satellite view, and I think it's funny. Places that are green have vegetation, and places that are green have the most civilizations, right? So we were, that time period especially was dependent upon water to grow vegetation, a lot for livestock, for people. And so you're going to have big civilizations in areas that are green. And so like the Persians, they're over here, right? The Euphrates River, there's always going to be life along the Euphrates. The path along this area of the ancient Middle East, it's going to have people, right? Egypt, it's going to have a big population. It's green, right? And so you can see that from Egypt to Persia, there's also going to be a very natural highway. So all travel is going to happen through this area. And so that's a big part of why this area was so popular. It was green. A lot of it was lush when there's a lot of desert. And it was also a travel area. And they also had people like the Philistines come over by boat from Cyprus, right? So it's kind of a lot of neat things. I also like just to look at the land so you can see like where the rivers are, and you know that that's going to affect people. You can see like the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee. So this is the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee. This is the original, like Moses's allotment of the land to the 12 tribes of Israel. You can see like where people were at. And I really enjoy looking at the maps, and it helps me. So I'll put up some map images for each week. And they come from this book, which you can check out from your local library if you'd like. And so everybody kind of has an outline of what we're hoping to do each week. You can see that we're in the fall quarter going to really only get up through chapter 9 is where we're going to get to. And then some things are going to happen over break week. So before next week, so before you get to the next one or watch the next video, you need to read it, right? There's a couple ways to read it. One is we handed out books, so everybody's got a book in the small group. I've got, I think, 2 left if anybody still wants a book. It's only something like 12 pages, so it's not that hard for a week's worth of reading. Our meeting is at noon, so if you start reading at 10:30, you should probably be able to make it, right? I don't really know how long it takes to read, but I know how people work, and the motivation of having a noon meeting, it's okay if you read it just before. That's okay. You can also use Audible. So Audible is a company owned by Amazon. That's my preferred way to audiobook listen to things. So I chauffeur my kids around a ton. I have 4 kids. I like to go for runs, and I listen to Audible the whole time, right? And so I have 10, 12 hours a week just completely free to listen to audiobooks. And so that's my preferred option. It's also actually free to do. So you get 1 free month trial, and you get 1 free book with Audible. And even if you cancel your subscription, like on day 29, you cancel your subscription, you still get to keep the book and you still get to use it, right? So it is completely free. If you like Audible, you can keep paying for it if you want, but that doesn't matter to me. But I like that. The app works better on my phone than a bunch of others, right? There's also YouTube videos of the audio files. I'm not sure if they're legal or not, but you can definitely find them. So if you want to listen to it and not put down a credit card, you can always just do it on YouTube. But each week you should read the content and have the knowledge coming into the discussion, right? You should probably also bookmark the website. So I'm super excited about this thing. So I made a website. So we did the book distribution group intro, which you've now heard. And then we're going to start in on chapter 1 next week. On the website, there's also a link on here for chapter 1 preparation materials. So let's look at that and just kind of talk about what it is. So I say it pretty clearly in here. The only preparation that we the only ask is to read it. And there's other things on here that you could do in your personal time to prepare that are completely optional. So the task you need to do is read or listen to chapter 1. Other things that you could do is you could watch the sermon from Scott Longyear. So the reason that we're doing the story, we're following along with what Maryland Church is doing. That's where I go to church. On this Sunday, so today is the 9th, so on the 11th, Scott Longyear is going to preach about chapter 1, right? And so you can watch his sermon, if you would like, before we meet. It'll make you like the smart person in the room if you watch his sermon. You can view it a bunch of different ways. You can go there physically in person. That's what I like to do. It's at 9:30 and 11:15. So I'm going to be there at the 9:30 on Sunday. That's just where I'm going to be. I like to watch it live, right? So theater versus movies. You can also watch it. They post it, the video of it, online immediately after. So they've got this sermon archive for Maryland. So all the different things. So I think it's going to be, like you can see, here's the logo for the story. It's not up yet because it hasn't happened when I recorded this video. And so here's like the direct link to where it's going to be at once it is recorded and up there. Other things you can completely optionally do to prepare is somebody's made word puzzles for these things. So this is a crossword puzzle this week, and then there's a kind of a boggle game on the back. These are just to help you with your knowledge, right? So it's just ways to kind of get better with your knowledge. and just kind of help you in a fun way try to review these. They're not graded. It's not part of your grade in the course. That's a joke. But you can do them if you'd like. I printed them out this week for people. And we'll see if people like me printing them, I'll keep printing them. But you can always go see the solutions at this link's here. Other things you could do, there's a study guide that goes along with this. I own the study guide. You don't have to. It's made by one of the people that wrote a foreword for this, Randy Frezzi. Don't know how to say the last name. He also makes 10-minute videos that we're going to watch each week, part of his study guide, which is kind of neat. In the study guide, I've kind of illegally copied some of the questions that he's got in here. I don't think he's going to mind, but just to help you with the knowledge parts as you prepare for the week. So a couple multiple choice, a couple fill in the blanks, and then there's answers right there. The other thing you could do is you could read the unabridged Bible, right? So the regular old Bible. So in order to read the regular Bible, if you'd like to, you should see where they took the chapter from. So you can see that they skipped Genesis 5, and they don't include Genesis 10 or 11 in the story. They took it specifically from those chapters. If you wanted to read, I would recommend that you read 1 through 11. So that's going to get you the same information as what's in chapter 1. It's obviously longer, but if you wanted to get it from the Bible, that would be great. I will say this week's pretty easy. In future weeks, it starts to get harder, right? So even chapter 2, you have to read Genesis, 13 through 40, essentially 12 through 40, I think. But you need to look at what the next week is going to be covering and read up to them. So if you wanted to do that, you could. It is completely optional. I mean, the point of the series is that we're reading the story because it's more focused on God's story. It's easier to read in a narrative form that will cause you fewer hangups. But if you want to read the Bible, you can do that as well. So that's it for this week. Pretty long recap this week because I talked so much this week. But my plan in the future is to really make it all about a discussion. And I'll try to record some of the things that we say when we're there so that you can get caught up if you ever missed a week or just to kind of have the archive out there for anybody that wants it. All right. Thanks so much for joining. We'll see you hopefully in person next time.